I held a mini retreat on the weekend. It was around the art of creative living, and I loved the theme, and I created the theme because I feel like so often we can feel like life is just happening to us, and I understand that feeling as well, very, very well. But it's also where we can learn to or remind ourselves how to look a little deeper beyond the surface. So when we are presented with perceived roadblocks for where we are versus where we want to be, and we can't really see a solution on the surface, when we just go, well, this is it, I guess that's all. To me, that's not really a response. I feel like there are different creative ways that we can look at these things in our lives and approach these things in our lives and let ourselves be the masters of our own fate, if you will, and be proactive in the creation of our lives. And it is a co-creation between us, what we can do, and another power, whatever you refer to that power as, whatever you see that power or feel that power as, the universe, God, just this force of life just happening, whatever it is for you, there is a co-creation that is happening, because life will still just happen as it does, regardless of the why it does. It will still just happen. There will be things that we didn't specifically create that come up. A lot of these things will be things that we don't love or that don't feel good. Or that are heartbreaking or whatever it is, but there is a balance in how we can co-create amongst the things that will happen anyway. So it's a little bit like, how do we respond to these things versus trying to control them. But the point of the retreat theme was really to dive a little more into recognizing first where we do actively create in our lives. So one of the examples I gave was if we identified that we wanted a new job, and then we took the steps to seek out a new job, we sought that out for ourselves, and then suddenly we're in this new job. So that is an active creation that you would have done for yourself at any stage. If you are working, if you have a job, you've actively created that for yourself. Even if it just came into you taking the time and deciding to say yes or no is an active creation. So we looked at actively creating and where we can give ourselves kudos and recognition for where we do that. And then we also looked at where we feel like life is just happening to us as well. And that can be a tricky one for people to look at, myself included. Sometimes it's just confronting, and sometimes it just feels overwhelming, or it can make us feel down in some way, especially if it reminds us of stuff that we want, that we feel like we're at the mercy of other external factors. But from there, the really powerful moment was when we then came back to it, looked at those things, let ourselves acknowledge those things, and then we explored and let ourselves almost be silly and playful, right? Where we just explored, what is the most outrageous thing I could do in this scenario? What could I do about it, right? So we had butcher's paper, and when we were talking about or writing down the most outrageous things that we could do, it wasn't things that you would actually do necessarily. So there wasn't the pressure of then having to commit to it because you wrote it down on paper. There wasn't the pressure of figuring out how to do it if it was something. It was just what are the infinite scenarios, no matter how absolutely ridiculous, what are the infinite scenarios of how I could respond to this challenge or this roadblock or whatever it felt like for you or for them? What are the most ridiculous or absurd or outrageous or whatever ways that I could respond to it? And just having that little bit of permission to go, oh, I could respond to it this way. I'm not necessarily going to. In fact, I'm likely not going to. But I could. In a scenario, I could decide, well, you know, this has happened, or this is shit. I'm going to run down the street, like flailing my arms about, squealing or screaming or shouting, you know, and that's outrageous and that's absurd, but it's also something that could happen, that you could do. And what happened as we wrote down each ridiculous, fun, playful, outrageous, totally dumb, totally out of character, totally whatever else thing that we could do in response to the scenario, we kind of scraped the shit aside a little. So what we do with our brain when we're in that process of we're kind of getting the crappy ideas out of the way, or the unrealistic ideas out of the way, so that way there's a little bit of a clearer slate for the real ideas to come in. And it also taps into the creative part of our brain to get us thinking more creatively, so that way more ideas can feel invited to come in, and eventually they will start to become viable ideas. They will start to become things that might actually work, that you could actually do, that would feel good to do, rather than the things you could do that were just dumb and outrageous. You let yourself just indulge in the playfulness of imagination, and as if you're in a movie, just totally overreacting without actually doing the reacting, you're just putting it on paper. And eventually ideas started to come out of, well, actually, I could do this. And then you look at it and you go, well, actually, I could do that. And I believe I could do that. So it starts to shift your mindset, and it starts to shift the way that you think and the way that you create and the way that you imagine. So there's a creation, and you deliberately step into co-creation at that point. So it was such a good experience, and in truth, the activity kind of came out of kind of at a surprise to me. When I was sitting down, I originally envisioned doing something slightly different, but then when it came to it, that felt like the right way to go. And what happened then was the realization that we get to actively create our lives. And we know that already, yes. You know, any inspirational speaker, any motivational talker will tell you these things, yes, but these are the little practices where you get to play and see how that feels for you when you try on the absurd, so that way when a viable response comes to you, a viable idea comes to you, it doesn't seem that far of a reach. And just how you perceive those ideas shifts, which makes everything a little bit more possible, which is so important. Otherwise you stay in stagnation, you stay in the life that you already live, rather than growing, rather than expanding, rather than trying new things. And it also means that you are tapping into that creative brain, and that is really important to create, because otherwise, if we only think logically, if we only think with the logical part of our brain, there's not a lot of room for creativity, and there's not a lot of room for new. There's just a lot of room for the same and the same and the same. So next time you feel like you're at a roadblock of, whoa, what do I do next? I don't know how to do this. Or you find that you're just looking at the surface and going, oh, well, this seems to be the scenario. Let yourself just indulge for a few minutes and just write down all the ridiculous ways that you could respond to it differently. And then see what comes out of that, see what emerges, because you're creating space there, and that can be a real game changer.